Hello and good evening, everyone. Gareth Presh, founder of the World Health Innovation Summit, and I am delighted to welcome you to our 16 days of activism supporting gender-based violence. And this evening, we're having a discussion with Sean Cook, CEO of Men's Development Network in Ireland. Good evening, Sean. I hope you're well settled in there for this discussion this evening.
I am indeed, Gareth. I'm really looking forward to it, and thanks very much for the invitation.
No, it's a pleasure. And just a little bit of background, over the last couple of days, we've had some exciting discussions and very informative discussions, shall I say, an introduction to gender-based violence. We've also spoken about intimate partner violence. And we've had a real insight into some of the challenges that we face in terms of advocacy and raising awareness. So this evening, we're going to look at the role of men and boys as advocates for gender equality and allies to women. So let's get into the discussion, and Sean, if you could just give us a little bit of background, tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that Men's Development Network is involved in.
Sure. Well, listen, I started here in the Men's Development Network 2 years ago, so it's just over 2 years. So I should be well bedded in now at this stage in terms of the organisation. My background is in kind of community development work. But as my father would have said, that I left school at 15 and I served my time as a sheet metal worker, and then I've been in school ever since. So my father said, for an early school leaver, you never left school really at the end of the day. So I've been back and forth. I went back to college as a mature student and did a master's in community development, and this is how I ended up here really. But as I said, my background's in kind of community development work and youth development work. So coming into the gender area was a kind of a new experience for me back in 2018. But it has been incredibly informative, and I'm kind of humbled in some ways around the experience when you come into an arena like this and see what's actually happening in the work and the commitment people have to the work around me. So that's kind of where I'm coming from into the area. Sorry.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about the campaigns that you're involved in at the moment, and that experience that you have. That'd be great to share with the audience.
Sure. Well, I suppose as an organisation, we exist 23 years, just a little bit over 23 years, and we originally were established as a father support group, where there was a group of you would call them kind of professionals. There were youth workers, community workers, people involved in the health sector, wherever it may be, and in around the southeast of Ireland, and they just wanted to become better fathers and better partners, and to be their more authentic self. This is what they were striving for, and so they started to meet and support each other in terms of looking at those various different things and addressing those issues of social conditioning. Kind of the social conditioning and the issues around transforming masculinities just within themselves. And as an organisation, then we developed a methodology called our 7 Key Questions, which is it's a process in how we engage with men around their health and their where they're coming from and what they want. And they're very basic questions. They're like, there's nothing overly difficult with them or highbrow, as you say. They're broken down into 3 areas. One is around the first couple of questions are reflective. It's about asking how you are, what's going well for you, what's not going well for you. The second couple of questions then are very much around analysis in terms of where you're at, what's going on, what supports might you need. And then the third then is around action. Okay, what's the one step you can take to address this issue, and what impact do you think it'll have? So using that methodology is how we've engaged men around their mental health, around their general health. But we've also used this methodology to develop training programs to work with frontline service providers to help them and assist them in engaging men around their health. Okay, and so what we do is that we take put the man at the center of the service as well, as opposed to the family, and get service providers and frontline service providers to kind of think about what are the issues for men when they come in, or certainly around their health initially. What are the blockages? and get them to think about, okay, where's that man when he walks into that room, or if he's not even in that room, where are they? Okay, so that's a lot of that. That's the work that's there, and from that, I suppose we moved into the area of in terms of policy. So we developed a very strong relationship with Noel Richardson from the Men's Health Centre and the Carlow Institute of Technology, and we were very much an instrumental in relation to the developing. As you know, Ireland was the first country in the world to develop a men's health policy. And we were very much instrumental as part of that to ensure that it had a social determinants perspective as opposed to just a medical model. So we were very much involved in that. And then we got into a very interesting story. About 15 to 16 years ago, there was an incident where in Dublin city centre, and Nuala Fuelon, I don't know if you remember, the Irish Times journalist, came across an incident, a violent incident in the street in Dublin, and she wrote then in our usual, I think the Irish Woman's Diary article in the Times that following Saturday, and on the Monday here in this office there was a conversation about the article, but she posed a question at the very end of the article saying, "Where are all the men?" Okay,
right.
In this particular domestic violence and gender-based violence experience that she would had, because when she looked around, she saw an enormous amount of supports for women who were victims of violence and domestic violence, but it was all being provided by women. Where was the men? Where was the guy stepping up and saying this is not okay? So from that perspective, then we used our own method, our methodologies that we have around the 7 key questions about engaging men. And we then related that to kind of developing an intervention program with perpetrators of domestic violence. And yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, it's really, what you're describing there is very much in line with our discussion with Andrew Payne the other evening. Like, he was talking about the difficulties, and also what was startling to me was the statistic he gave, which is something like 99% of refuge spaces are for women. Yeah. So less than 1% for men, and I think
is that a worldwide? Is that a worldwide?
That was in the UK. That was in the UK.
Well, it's 100% women. There's not one for a man. There's not one bed for a man in Ireland. So yeah. So
that was going to lead me into, like, these are big challenges, aren't they? In terms of like trying to get public policy, raising awareness, advocacy. And then I was going to ask, I mean, you're facing these challenges that are there, and you were talking about the stress, the well-being, anger management, and all these different areas within the 7 points. Do you find, because you said 23 years you've been engaged, Men's Development Network, is digital technology now becoming, like, is that helpful? Because this is one of the things I'd love to know about as well.
Okay, well, we have, I suppose, for me personally, in terms of what happened around COVID, has been it's offered us a real opportunity to broaden our reach. We have very quickly we redesigned and recalibrated one of our jobs in the organization to work around the technology, and along with that, then we did a lot of work then with some of our leadership representatives and some of our facilitators around how can we make a safe environment in the virtual world. So we've been doing a lot of work around that, and I think I wouldn't say we've cracked it in any shape or form, but I think we have found ways to do developmental work within a video conferencing perspective, and it's been really, I've been really heartened by it. I will say that one of the key challenges around it is not necessarily participants. It's probably our facilitators. They're not comfortable around it. And they much prefer to be in the room and see the whites of people's eyes and make sure that they stay in the room. But also the big issues about everybody being safe, and that that they feel confident in terms of what's been happening there and are taken care of. But one of the critical things around our work is also that people take responsibility for what they're doing themselves, and that's an easier thing to do, to challenge somebody to take that responsibility when you're in the room with them, because you don't know where they're going to go if you challenge them. They just all of a sudden, oh, the signal's going. I'm in a tunnel, and you're lost.
Yeah, and they're gone.
Yeah, so no, it has been very, very positive for us so far. We have recalibrated all our training programs online and through the virtual stuff, and all of our developmental programs we have done as well, which have been really good. Like we do a parent support program, which we piloted there 2 weeks ago for the past the 8 weeks previous, where we worked with 5 couples around it's a parent support program, and we did it all online, and it worked out really, really well. So we're learning as we go along, but I think we're off the blocks with it, which is great. And we've just started a new program in rural Waterford, where we're working with isolated men, and that's taken a while to get going. But what we've done is we've given them all tablets, which we've configured them around in terms of access around Teams or Zoom or wherever it may be, and we've given them dongles for broadband, so that we can actually do a piece of work with them over the next 3 months. And then when they're finished that program, they give us back the tablet, so then we give it to another 10 or 12 people. So it has been interesting, in doing that work. Yeah.
That's brilliant, because like we have some of the audience here from Kenya, and I know some Cameroon as well, and the UK tuning in, and being able to share that best practice so that there's lessons learned, just not in Ireland, but right across the globe. It's just fantastic.
Sorry, Gareth, can I just say, if people go onto the website, we did a webinar just near the end of the summer around working developmentally online. Okay, and we should have it up online as a thing where you can actually click on it and watch it. If it's not there, I'll get on to Mark about it, but it should be there, because we did a piece of work where we got in people who had been doing this work online and the challenges that we've had. So it's a really nice piece to get a hold of and people have a look at. Sorry.
Perfect. No, what I'll do is we've just shared that link in the chat box, so people can go online and check it out. I was gonna just come to the point around barriers and challenges, and I suppose this is being a man myself, and like it's very difficult for men to express themselves, in terms of coming forward, and when we look at the challenges faced by men in our society with respect to access and health services and support, stigma, shame, silence, bias, ideas around masculinity. Where do you feel are we seeing those barriers come down, or is there still a lot of work to do? And also then, how do you think these situations have developed over time? What is the root cause? I'd be fascinated to hear your insights.
Well, okay. In terms of the first question, I think there has been some significant changes over the past number of years in terms of the notion of fatherhood, the notion of masculinity. If I had a penny for every young man that said to me I'm a feminist, I wouldn't be poor. So I think there has been very, very significant changes there, which is fantastic. Is there more to do? Absolutely. I think that the challenge is around that, the social conditioning is around that notion of what it is to be a man. We did I thought it was interesting recently where Promundo did a piece of work around, they were looking at if you had a young boy that was in a fairly well-grounded house where they were open to the understandings around what it was to be a boy, and they didn't restrict the boy to very kind of narrow viewpoints of masculinity, wherever it may be. And when they reached around 10 or 12, they would have had that really positive experience of what it was to be a man, encouraged to be emotional, encouraged to be empathetic, and express themselves verbally, and given the language and the emotional language in which to do that. And then when they hit 10 or 11, when they were meant to be going out into the world, and the whole world, their worldview was meant to broaden further as they went out into this world. And it did to a certain degree, their networks broadened. But what actually happened for the young men, though, or the young boys, was that the notion of masculinity narrowed. because of peer pressure and all the other social conditioning aspects that are out there. So I really thought that was interesting. Even in the best environments that you put things, when you have a situation whereby the patriarchy exists, it's endemic within structures, it's endemic in how we go about various different things. It's a very, very difficult thing to overcome, and even that bias, and your own unconscious bias, or how you do various different things, But and then all those other things that you talk about in terms of shame, from a man's perspective, around them being their most authentic self, or not being able to present themselves. Like I thought was I can give two examples. People have asked me about, well, when we talk about the difficulty for a man in terms of expressing themselves, like where it is that blockage, or where it is that, could you give us an example of it? And I have two really good ones. One is around, I heard a story recently of one of our leadership reps talking about being afraid to hold his grandson's hand going to school in case of how he might be viewed among his peers and men. Okay, and that, Jesus, was heartbreaking to hear that. He didn't want to hold his hand, like his 4-year-old or 5-year-old grandson's hand. Like, so that's a real example of that kind of social conditioning that has really impactful upon men and what actually happens to them. And the other one was an example of somebody talking about that she was bringing her father to the airport to meet her brother who hadn't been home for 5 years. And his automatic instinct of his father was to put out his hand and shake his hand and welcome home, rather than to embrace him and grab him and hold him as tight as you possibly can. And so they're very, very simple examples of that kind of concept of masculinity that really has significant impacts for men, in terms of their mental health and well-being.
It's sad in many ways, isn't it, really, when we look at society, how it's developed. And even with COVID-19, I suppose it's exacerbated it. We've had an experience the last couple of days with my two girls have been desperate to meet, Nana and Granddad. And we had a situation where, we're social distancing at the moment, and both of them are in their in their early 70s, shall we say. So they're in the high risk category. And I had to explain to them the other day that they couldn't hug Nana and Granddad, and they were both very upset. And the profound effect that has then on the relationships, between the families, so it is a very difficult thing. And I think COVID, when we come out of this situation, will probably have put barriers in that we need to address. And one of the things I really wanted to touch on and brought up when you were talking about this situation was around, do you think the likes of Skintoskin at an early age, the release of oxytocin, because we're from a generation, me and you, we're from a generation certainly that we were taken away from our mothers when we were born, right? And that, I believe, would have a profound effect on our mental capability, shall we say, empathy. And have you come across any research around the first 3 years and the importance that plays in certainly how men develop as an individual? I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that would be.
Yeah, to be fair, Garrett, I haven't kind of gone that far back in terms of it. But I suppose one of the things that we have come across in terms of our work, especially working with perpetrators, and sometimes even with victims, is the concept of trauma. Yes. What is happening, for men, women, and everyone else. Trauma is such a significant aspect. And I think when we're talking about addressing the issue of masculinity, of domestic violence, and the role of men within that, I think we have to look at the issue of domestic violence, and it needs to be a more holistic approach around it in terms of being also looking at trauma, social conditioning, and gender. It can't be seen in a one kind of, it's a triple.
Yeah, in a linear sort of way of looking at it, black and white. Yeah, I mean, the reason why I brought it up, because I always look at the point of view, when I worked in the Irish Health Service with the HSE, one of the jobs that kind of was around strategy, and I always look at things from the point of view was why did these things happen? So I always try and look at it from the perspective of why did we get to that position? Why did that individual make that decision? And how has that come to pass? So that's part of part of the reason why I asked that question. And if we look at the importance of men as allies, leaders, and advocates, to prevent gender-based violence, what steps can we change or can we take to change that culture?
Well, I think there's been lots of conversations that I have heard when we talk about if we're going to solve the problem of violence in every form it is, that we have to have men have to be seen as to be part of the solution as opposed to being just the problem. And I think that's a really important aspect around that. And I think it's really interesting when you look at violence that happens in society. When it happens in the public realm, it's about 90% of it is man on man. Okay, so there is a culture that exists that there's a normative sense that this is okay. That violence, men being violent with each other is okay. And as our president in Ireland said, violence is a learned behavior. You're not born violent, you learn this behavior. So it's a social condition that emerges. Okay, so it's your experience in life that you see, what you see with your eyes, what you experience, wherever it may be, brings that about. And we consolidate that through the notion of what it is, those kind of very traditional norms around strength and stoicism, around being a man and what it is, and what to be able to stand up for yourself, to be able to fight for yourself, and even that we've done things like war is a very masculine thing, and that there's always men that went to war, but this was only reinforcing that kind of patriarchy as well, that we're meant to be there to protect everybody and so forth. So I think that I think I might be wandering a bit here in some senses, but I like, for me, around getting into the work is really, really difficult. It is a challenge. Okay, first off, we have to do a lot of work as men for women's organizations to embrace us as part of the solution. There's a lot of work there to be done with that. There are some women's organizations that may not want to ever do that, and that's okay. But I think we are in that space where we've spent 23 years developing those allies with women's organizations, where we work with them, even with our perpetrator program, that we're working with men who are perpetrators. A key ally of ours, we do a partner support program for those women, of those men who are involved in the program, and that's with those women's organizations for where they are from, that they would support that woman and ensuring to avoiding risky and managing risk as well. So I think a lot of it is around kind of fostering those relationships and working with them. I think from the Men's Development Network, we've been very upfront and out there. We come from a strong gender equality perspective, underpinned by feminist values, we do a lot of work around the White Ribbon Campaign, which is about men ending violence against women. We do our DV program, which is another ending violence against women program. We've also been involved in the Turn Out the Red Light campaign, which is around ending demand for prostitution, and the We Don't Buy It campaign. So we've developed relationships and worked with organizations around addressing those particular key issues for women. And as men, stepping up into those places, stepping in and stepping up, but also knowing when to step back, because it's important that we do step back around various different things, and not to be mansplaining everything, if you get my point around it too. So.
Yeah, I think it's so valid. Like, some of the points that you're raising here, are very interested in terms of, getting equality, because this is what it's all about, isn't it? In this complex space, because there's no doubt one of the, over the last couple of days in discussion this evening, we can see that these are very complex social issues, and not really anything that's black and white, shall we say. They come from various different sources, why these things happen, and then how do we find these solutions, and you need a multidisciplinary approach, like you said, with the partnerships, the relationships. And also what I think is fascinating is well, it's not fascinating. It's just a reality that this change takes time, and it's a slow moving process, and it can take generations. It was very interesting earlier last year. I had an experience of going to Espoo in Finland, and I was so amazed at how the local community there were just totally championing their area. Okay, now you know yourself, when you go into your local area, most people are talking negative about their area. But the guys in Finland were like talking about Make with Espoo, which is one of their cities, and every single citizen you bumped into would just talk about how great their city was, which is such an amazing feeling, because what that means, they have pride in their area. They look after the investment, then it flows into the area because they create jobs, because people want to be there. And it's just, but I asked the guy who set that up, Marco Marcola, at the time, he's a very influential person in the European Commission, and I asked him, how did you do that? And he said to me, it took generations, like literally 20, 30 years to get that mindset to work. You have to start with the seeds, and I suppose that's really what we have to try and do here, is start with the seeds in the schools and build it up, and it'll take time. That's the thing. Your White Ribbon campaign that you mentioned, and can you tell us a little bit about the aims of the programs and why they are so important to be inclusive, and what they contribute to peaceful societies? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, well, I think maybe it might be useful just to give a quick overview of where White Ribbon came from, because I think the motivation behind why it has actually established itself is really interesting. Like, this came about because of an incident. An incident is not the word for a kind of a horrendous traumatic event in Canada, where a guy brought a number of women into a school hall and then shot them all. Okay, and so it brought about a huge reaction and quite a significant amount of revulsion, and but interesting enough, a guy called Michael Kaufman in Canada then kind of said, well, listen, we need to do something as men. We need to put ourselves in a position where we try to end this violence, and as men who are trying to be our most authentic selves, understand that how this happens, can be changed. It can be reversed. That's the other really positive thing around the work that we do, where we're coming from at it, is that we think we can work with everybody really at the end of the day, and that we can actually turn this thing around. It may be a big Greek tanker, but it can be turned around. And so that was in his way. Then lots of different organizations around the world, people around the world took up the White Ribbon campaign and started that campaign. And it's very clearly it has a pledge, which is never to commit, excuse, or remain silent in relation to violence against women. We encourage people to take that pledge. It's been happening for us all week on we've had champions for the 16 days of action on White Ribbon campaign. And we've had people taking the pledge online and doing stuff like that. So it's been really kind of positive. I think the other part and the work is around raising awareness in relation to violence, and raising awareness around what you can do. I think there was an interest. I came across something about an incident of a rape attack on a campus in America sometime. There was this, and some Swedish young man stepped in and prevented the attack, and something came out of that particular attack. And I suppose it's about people making. That's a very extreme example of somebody stepping in to address the issue of violence against women and stuff like that. But I think there are other actions that one can do, and some of it can be just around our language. Some of it can be around reflecting on what's been happening, and also about even asking the question yourself about, like, why is that? Well, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so a lot of the work that we do in schools is around bringing that moment of reflection, placing the issue of violence against women in a social context, and in even a political context, and a cultural context, so to try and dismantle it. So that they are primarily the aims that will be there around that. And it's gathered quite a lot of momentum, and there's some very, very innovative programs have come out of it, or certainly awareness raising events. Like, I think the Australians came up with a walk a mile in her shoes, where they had an event that men would put on women's shoes and walk a mile, and whatever. It has its moments, whatever it may be. I think it became quite like a Mardi Gras event at the end of the day, but it was still a very good event to raise awareness. And we've been very fortunate in Ireland here that we've had Tom Maher has been a strong advocate and ambassador for the White Ribbon in Ireland. And for Tom, he was brilliant, but unfortunately for Tom, his wife Jill was raped and murdered in Melbourne. And after that, he became a very, very strong advocate for the White Ribbon campaign and men ending violence against women. So, and also part of that is around the gender equality aspect of it, because I think it's been really interesting, especially over the period of COVID, watching men come onto the radio or the TV and talking about their journeys. Their journeys of the difficulties that they may have had. And I think, it warms my heart listening to these stories, because not only do they be advocates for whatever the issue may be, it could be mental health, it could be cancer, it could be wherever. They're really strong advocates for this thing. But what I think they are, though, is that that is the first step towards gender equality, because it's dismantling that notion that I as a man have to be strong, self-reliant, resilient, deal with this issue by myself, whatever it is. And when you get men to be able to be aware that that's not what they have to be, it opens up a whole plethora of space where they can actually reflect on who they are and reflect on their own attitudes, their own understandings of the places that they're in, that they can really challenge themselves, in a positive way about what can I do to be positive around to make my world a better place, to make my home, my family, my community, my society a better place. So they get the chance to do that, but only if they get the opportunity and the emotional, I suppose what I call intelligence, or the emotional language to engage in those kind of conversations. Yeah.
And that really leads into, I have two last questions for you. One is around, if the educational system reinforcing, the stereotypical and narrow gender roles, is that a problem that you face at the moment?
Oh, I think it is. To be very blunt about it, I think it is. Yep. I also don't think that schools are the silver bullet either, or the panacea. There are lots of programs that go on in school. Listen, I've been involved in youth work and community work for years, and you go in to do stuff in schools where because you basically have young people that are like a fish in a barrel, and it's great. But there are massive demands on schools and access to those children. And I think that this is the problem with it. I think there really needs to be a more, in terms of curriculum development, a more holistic program of work that deals with the issues, just say, of healthy relationships, the environment, sexual consent, sexual violence, in a more holistic way. That it's not like 10 different programs coming in the door. We should be looking at the environment and what that means to us, what it is to have a healthy relationship, what it is to be involved in a sexual relationship. All those type of things should be graduated from 4 years of age right through till you finish leaving. You're leaving third level education. I think it's too late going into schools doing consent work in first year in college.
Oh, I totally agree, and especially nowadays with digital technology, because if you look, my 5-year-old can use my Apple mobile phone, no problem, and they're computer illiterate, they can get online so quickly now. Whereas when I know myself, when I was 12, 13 years of age, I had no even insight into having a girlfriend, for example, because I was just during that age, all we were interested in was playing football. That was it. Yeah. That was our life, So the times have moved on so quickly over the last couple of years. I was just going to ask one final question, which is around the next steps for Men's Development Network, and have you any plans that you want to share with the audience here this evening, or any final messages? And also I think we'll round off as well, which we should definitely amplify that pledge.
Sure. Yeah. I think, well, like for us, really, what the big work this year, we kind of made, I suppose, a significant inroad into doing something positive around International Men's Day. And so we had a campaign around identifying an individual in a man in your life who had a very, very, very positive influence for you, and to get them to nominate, to outline their 3 qualities, wherever it is, and then to nominate other people to do so. So that was kind of a very positive campaign around that. I think for me, the big issue is about getting into that area, that digital area, providing, recalibrating all those programs, building our capacity around engaging digitally in a safe, constructive, and developmental way is really, really important. You know, I think they're the kind of the key issues, you know. And I think the last one, I suppose, is the more general one, which is about that conversation where, like, when we talk about new conversations with men. That's a lot of the time we create spaces. Part of our strategic objectives to create spaces for men, for new conversations with and for men. And so I think, in terms of just say that conversation in relation to gender equality, and if you say gender equality, it gets lost to a certain degree. But I think we need to be provided, and there needs to be national campaigns, I think, in relation to gender equality. It should be the equivalent to clunk click every trip, and the same around domestic violence, so that you can actually have that conversation in a space where people are talking about it in their homes, you know, as well. Mm-hmm. So the school is one thing, but we need to be talking about it around the kitchen table, and we need to be talking about it around the fireside, wherever it may be. That we need to be kind of creating those spaces to allow those conversations to be had, so that young people don't just kind of take on these things by osmosis, that they've actually had to think them through before they actually take them on board, and then becomes ingrained and normalized, becomes normative behavior that they would have. So that'll be the critical thing about a new conversation, really, to get out there and have that, open it up.
Well, look, Sean, I mean, it's been a pleasure speaking to you this evening as part of our 16 days of activism. And I just want to thank yourself, and, you know, you're a brilliant advocate, the Men's Development Network doing fantastic work. I'm just going to say to everyone, you know, over the next couple of days, we have a couple of sessions. On the 2nd, you'll see tomorrow evening, we have education for prevention of gender-based violence. On Friday evening, we have financial violence as a form of gender-based violence. Then on the 7th, we have human trafficking, modern slavery, and gender-based violence. On the 8th, we have women in healthcare, gender-based discrimination, and workplace harassment. The last 2 sessions that we have as part of the 16 days of activism, policing, human rights, and gender-based violence. And then finally, we finish up with the UN SDGs as a vehicle for addressing gender-based violence. I just want to thank everyone who's joined us this evening. And the final word is really to get involved in the White Ribbon Pledge. And that is, I promise never to commit, excuse, or remain silent about men's violence against women. And you can check out all this great work that's going on. Sean gave the details earlier. It's the men's network.ie. And anything we can do across social media, just get in touch. So it's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's session, and we look forward to welcoming you tomorrow evening to our next session. So good night from myself and Sean, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll end this discussion.
Thank you.